This is nice.
Yeah.
It's like Lego thing.
Yes.
Is that yours?
Yes, that is mine.
I'm kind of wondering like what all you build and then like
We topple the castle
every day. Like,
Yes.
but it's magic. It stays up.
Healthy relationships. I'm on board.
between pegs on the Legos.
No, it's toppling healthy relationships.
Oh,
That's a different panel.
yeah. that one's called Trainwrecks 101.
Well, we're trying to be the problem players up here.
It's how you find out.
It's
It's
live
trial and
it's a
error.
live demonstration. We're going to have Dr. Megan actually wrangle all of us.
I'm being model student right now.
Suck up.
This is going to end with me in handcuffs. I'm sorry. I apologize.
You can tell because of his glasses.
Attica! Attica!
Well, on that note, I guess we'll get started. So, welcome everybody. This is our talk on how to play well with others, how to have conflict resolution at your table, basically how to talk to people. Yes. If any of you watched our show, Clinical Role, that Dr.B and Adam are players on, you'll know we deal with this often. But
I don't know what you're talking about.
no idea. So why are we doing this panel? Well, I've spent a lot of time, too much time, on Reddit, and the subreddit DM Academy has recently introduced a filter just for player problems. Just for people to talk about player problems, and so you can filter out if you want to see player problems or not. One of the things that I get to do, and is a lot of fun, is I am the creator and person who does psychology at the table, and it was seeing so many posts about player problems was the reason that I actually started that series. It was things where I was reading through posts and going, oh my gosh, that really sounds like this player is struggling with depression, or man, it seems like they're having problems with somebody with ADHD at their table. And realizing that DMs maybe needed some resources on how to manage different behaviors that they were seeing at their tables. And so that's really where that came from. And then writing through it, also realizing that people don't necessarily know just how to talk and how to set up expectations and boundaries at their gaming tables. And one of the things that you're going to see is the flow chart. Is anybody familiar with this from Reddit? Oh my God, okay. So if you're on any Reddit and you post or read about a player problem, someone is going to post this, which is the great flow chart of how to deal with a problem player or a problem dungeon master or game master. And generally the joke in this is nobody does step one. Right? And it's this thing of like, as soon as someone does a post of, I'm having this problem with this player, the first question everybody's asking is, have you talked to them? And pretty much the answer is always, no, I haven't talked to them. And I've found that a lot of times it seems to be because they don't know how to articulate the problem. They don't know exactly what to say. And so that's sort of the inspiration of this panel, is learning about how to talk about the problems, how to bring them up in a tactful way that's not going to divulge into an argument, and then also just to give some other tips for prevention. Because here's the deal, talking to people is difficult. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a people pleaser, and I like to make people happy, and having to bring up an issue where someone's doing something that is frustrating or difficult, I have a real hard time with that. I don't like making people feel bad or thinking that they've done something wrong. Even if they have, it's still hard. And I think a lot of people can struggle with anxiety about talking to other people. And then again, we don't always have a clear idea of what the problem is. We just know that somebody's doing something that's annoying us and we just want them to stop. Please stop. But remembering too that prevention here is the best medicine in all of this. That you want to choose your party. You want to carefully think about who's going to be at your table. Having session 0, I think everybody here is going to talk a little bit about their session 0 questions and session 0 setups. How to check in with your players, and then the importance of communication. But that's more than enough out of my mouth, so let's have our panelists go down and introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and some of your experience of DMing. And with that, we'll go down the row, start with Grant.
Hello, everybody. My name's Grant Ellis. I am the co-designer at 2C Gaming, which does books like the TPK Handbook. I am the producer for WebDM's Twitch channel. I'm also the head dungeon master for RPG Sports. And from 2015 to today, I keep a spreadsheet. I have run role-playing games for 736 unique players. So I have some big feels on this topic because there's a wide variety, as you can imagine, when you play with a lot of unique human beings.
My name is Adam Davis. I'm one of the executive directors of Game to Grow, which is a nonprofit organization based in the Seattle area that actually runs therapeutic social skills groups using Dungeons and Dragons. And we see about 40 kids a week, a lot of whom have diagnoses of autism or ADHD or anxiety or depression. And with that comes a lot of social isolation and lagging social skills. So we see a whole lot of behaviors we need to address in one way or another.
I am Dr. B, amongst other things. I am the clinical director of Take This, the folks who run the AFK room at all the PAX events. I'm also the training consultant for another social skills program called Aspiring Youth in the Seattle area that uses applied role-playing games. And I'm the owner of a geeky therapy organization called Save Point Behavioral Health.
I'm Satine Phoenix, the community manager of Dungeons and Dragons, and the co-creator of Maze Arcana with Ruty Rutenberg, the dungeon master of Sirens of the Realms, an all-girl bard band on Tuesdays, on Inkwell Society, the host of Dungeon Master's Guide, it's a talk show on Sundays, and the founder of Celebrity Charity 20. It's we raise money for Reach Out and Read, which is a childhood literacy foundation.
I am Ruty Rutenberg. I am the co-founder of Maze Arcana with Satine Phoenix. I help her with CCD20, and I am also a screenwriter, voice actor, and I designed a thing called The Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron for D&D 5th edition with Keith Baker.
Just that.
Yeah, it's the I think #1 selling thing on the DM's Guild.
What's D&D?
The people that gave you that sweater.
What's up?
All right, so I think let's start off. I'd love to hear from each of you about an experience you've had either as a player dealing with another player or game master, or as a game master running a game and having problem players, but not just a gripe session about you won't believe what this player did, but how you resolved the conflict, things that you did to bring a positive change to the gaming table.
Yeah, I'll take it first. So I was talking with some friends about this when this came up, and I'd like to share an experience I had where there was a problem that I felt manifested itself, and we essentially diagnosed after the session. I received a text message the day after our typical home D&D game where we invite friends, family members. It was a 2.5-year long-running campaign, and the text message said, "I want you to know that I feel seriously bullied and harassed by you, Grant Ellis, at the gaming table." And I was the dungeon master for 2.5 years. I had known this player for a very long time, and we had a very close relationship. And I feel like I am severely disrespected by the gaming group, and I don't know if I want to play D&D anymore. I felt an intense agony in my heart when I read that. I am more passionate about role-playing games than possibly anything else on this planet. And I thought about how to respond. And my initial response was, I'm sorry that I hurt you like that. I owned it. They felt pain and they were upset. That's okay. We're humans. We have feelings. And I was identified as the cause. And I said, I'd like to talk about some of the behaviors I've had at the table that hurt you. And he goes, well, you know, you jab and tease a lot. And you know, when I think about this and we talk about it, I just haven't been sleeping well, and the sessions run really long sometimes. And, you know, I've just been, you know, really unhappy in my academic career. And, you know, there were layers to this. We accepted that there were extrinsic factors from the gaming table that was impacting their ability to join the game. They were dealing with struggles away from the gaming table, family problems, etc. But they trusted me to talk to me enough that essentially me teasing them from time to time hurt them. I wanted them to feel better. I said, let's talk about that. I own that. I'm not going to tease you at the gaming table and make you feel uncomfortable. And if you have a bad day, let me know. If you feel the sessions need to be shorter, let me know. And we can accommodate to this because currently I feel that we all need to have fun when we're playing at this table and at this session. And I want you to know that I hear you and I'm willing to make an effort to get better. Now, this is a player, as soon as that individual, all their friends are like, oh, well, they're really difficult to have at that table, and they're always antagonizing everyone, and they're very high-strung, and they're very intense, and they've yelled at people at the gaming table, and their behavior hasn't been good. I was like, yeah, but I'm not here to finger point. They came to me and told me that they had a problem with my behavior. And they told me, they expressed how thankful they were that I accepted how they felt, and that I was willing to share how I felt. And that I was willing to make just small modifications. It's not like we switched editions of the game. It's not like we changed seating arrangements. It's not like I told us, everyone at the group, we had to cleanse our dice in this archaic ceremony from 1974 that only the Gygax family knows. It's just, I let them know, I hear you and I understand your life is very difficult. And I'm thankful that you feel comfortable talking to me about it. And they were just very appreciative. And that helped just sort of beginning to talk. Even a lot of the factors, he just needed to talk to someone. He still plays today, and that was, 3 years ago, so it works talking about it.
If you want to go down the line, or you guys can go in a different order.
So, like I said earlier, I work with a lot of kids, youngest 8 and oldest early 20s. And what I do is a lot of this, I know this panel is about talking to your players, I do a lot of selectively ignoring them. So there is a dispositional quality that I'm a strong advocate for, which is attributing the best possible intention for people's behaviors consistent with the facts. And until you know somebody really well, it just serves you to attribute to them the best possible intention. Everyone is trying to do their best to get their needs met. And a lot of our kids, they have a strong desire to interact socially, and to be seen, and to be appreciated, and to take up space. And they don't have a lot of experience doing that. So that sometimes manifests itself by interrupting, by trying to showboat, by trying to steal the loot, or sometimes problematic behaviors that are about trying to get attention. So if we understand what the underlying cause is of their behavior, we can address it or choose to ignore it. So a lot of times problematic behaviors are attention-seeking behaviors like that. So if the behavior is attention-seeking, then sometimes talking about it is rewarding that behavior. If we stop the game and I say, hey, that thing you're doing, it needs to stop, then they have power. The game has stopped and they got rewarded for that problematic behavior. So oftentimes what I do is ignore problematic behaviors and then really, really appreciate very organically pro-social behaviors. Wow, I really appreciate how the group's all focused right now. As soon as they're focused, right away. Reward with a little bit of appreciation, nothing too manipulative. Kids can pick up on that pretty quickly too. But just really genuinely appreciating the kind of behaviors you want can be really valuable.
I'm getting all hot and bothered because he's talking about behaviorism.
It's not the sweater.
It's not, well, it's the layers I'm wearing underneath. Maybe I should eat more. I don't know.
It's not the double microphones you've got going on there.
Oh, I am. Hey, which one do I go with?
Let's talk about attention seeking.
Oh my God. But one of the things, because I work with a lot of similar folks that Adam does, a lot of folks, let's say, on the autism spectrum, and one of the biggest problems that a lot of folks on the autism spectrum experience is perspective taking, and that's exactly what you're doing in a role-playing game, is you're taking the perspective of another being. And so we end up having a lot of bleed at the table. I mean, everybody knows that term, yeah? Is anybody not familiar with that term? Nobody's going to, okay, cool, awesome, learning moment, yay! So basically, when your characters' experiences start to bleed over into your experiences in real life. That's the quickest, easiest explanation. I can go into like frame analysis and what, but I'm not going to. But so a lot of our kids end up taking their characters' experiences personally. And one very specific example is a kid who wanted to be different. I warned him. I so warned him ahead of time in our session 0 that playing an aboleth hybrid character was going to cause some problems. He was going to get stares in villages. He was like, no, I'm good with that, I'm good with that. Okay, you're an aboleth with an intelligence score of 6. You're gonna get made fun of. Are you okay with this? Yes, I'm okay with this. He was not. He started to take it very personally, and it's something we had to work with to talk about and to really differentiate how his player experiences were not his character's experience and work on setting that out. And similar to Adam, I like to talk about intention and what is he trying to get out of it and work with that. And so I had to do a lot of one-on-one talking with him before the session, and we had to come up with some strategies and some ways for him to like signal if he was getting too flustered with things. But honestly, trying to work with his motivations and understand his motivations, understanding the needs of your players on a sort of unspoken level, that is a big thing. Not what are they saying, but what do they really want? What are they trying to get out of things? Whether it's attention, whether that's playing a different perspective, understanding their unspoken needs is a huge advantage.
Yeah, and following that, like once you understand your players and what they need, you can actually listen to them. So I had a table where some of the players were very bright and big personality, and some of them have a lot smaller personalities, but everyone deserves the equality, right? They need the attention and respect from one another. And at this table, there were times where by being big and open, the other ones actually stopped role-playing and they would shrink. And then I felt the conflict. My thing is I feel the energy of the table. And I would see this happening and I would talk to each person and find out what it is that they were feeling. And then I was like, instead of just going to one person, I got everyone together and I'm like, look, this is what's happening, this is what I'm seeing, and this is how your action is making this person feel. Is that true? And then we would have these conversations. And I find that by everyone being responsible for their feelings and not me just being the moderator for other people's emotions, people start to understand each other and thus respecting one another. I mean, it's as simple as just telling them to look at one another during the game. That actually ended up helping a lot, where they could see the effect that they have on one another.
Yeah, Satine and I have spent quite a bit of time doing, I would say, like streaming, obviously, but maybe putting together games where people are in a higher, or in a bigger spotlight than we would normally have, like at home or in a clinical setting, maybe. And in those moments, it can be even harder to want to slow down the momentum or stop the momentum, because we're also kind of doing it for the experience of the people that are watching us as well. So one of the things that we do is try and make sure that, like, when we do our session 0, we do the same standard session 0 that I think most people do. We also do one before and after every game. And that way we can check in with everybody. And sometimes people need time to process what they've done during a session and whatnot. But D&D is very much, and collaborative role-playing and therapy and everything is about trust. And in order to establish and keep trust consistent, especially when you're only meeting maybe once a week, that's a very important thing to let people know that we're going to have a forum for this. It's going to be open, and you're going to have the opportunity to address this. Anything that you feel like happened. And one of the things Satine mentioned was eye contact, and we're very big about making sure that you are asking with your eyes to join a scene and inviting that person that's asking you with your eyes. So that way you're making the eye contact, you're feeling that person and seeing whether, like, oh, is this the right time? Because you can know, if you look somebody in the eye, you'll be like, yeah, they definitely do not want me here right now. I'm going to sit this one out. And like, you get a lot of opportunity to connect with people in a way that we sometimes wouldn't. And maybe that can be, if we have smaller personality people that are staring at their character sheets, that's a way to get them to open back up and not to close off entirely to the game. And it's also a way to keep the bigger players from getting up into the sky instead of keeping grounded with the others that are there.
Oh, that's good. So to kind of summarize each bit of advice, and I'm liking this because everyone had a little bit different. Part of it is owning your stuff, not being defensive when someone's coming to you with a problem, just hearing it and not getting defensive immediately. Understanding maybe why they're doing the thing. If it's attention seeking, then ignoring it. If it's not, then addressing it. Knowing your players and understanding that maybe they don't articulate what they want in the best way, and kind of reading between the lines to understand that, managing that energy and checking in with the energy, and then setting up playing guidelines like eye contact and things to help make sure that everything's staying in line, and then those frequent check-ins be something. Oh, I think that's awesome. One of the things I've talked about before is like being a dungeon master, it's being a manager of people. And I don't think that's a lot of what we sign up for when we go to run a game. We don't think about the fact that, like, I'm going to have to manage, 4 to 7 personalities and make sure that everybody's having a good time, knows how to play, and if you're streaming, keeping track of making it entertaining, keeping the pacing up, keeping people, there's a lot to do, and so there's a lot of stuff to think about. When you're setting up, and with the idea that prevention is a great method for nipping this stuff in the bud, what are some of the Session 0 guidelines that you guys each cover, or if you do a Session 0 even? I think, does everybody do that pretty much?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Or like pre-game rules or anything like that? Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
I'm involved in 9 different productions during the week, and it's taxing. And we don't always have the availability or the capacity based on the lives that we all live to get everyone to meet together. Some more recent systems have started codifying Session 0 in the rules. I run a lot of different games, but what I always do for every session, whether it's a one-shot or a campaign, I always write a campaign primer. In it, I try to level set the expectations of the campaign so people can raise concerns. They might say, this isn't my jam from the start, or they might say, have you considered the possibility that we might look at the campaign through a different lens? And we begin to talk about it usually through text format, emails, Discord channels, Twitter DMs, whatever the format works best for my players. I always try to adapt. Then I include in that document a confidential anonymous form, as well as a non-anonymous form where you reveal your identity, where you can set your boundaries and explain if you have limitations and boundaries. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, and I had that triggered on a stream with 700 people watching, and that was a very difficult thing to live through. But we didn't have a Session 0 or a primer document or the opportunity to disclose, and the Dungeon Master felt horrible that happened. They were a personal friend, and they realized that they had put me through a very difficult, painful situation. But they learned from that experience, and I learned as well, because I'm human, and I might make a mistake too, and I might not know someone's boundary and limitations. So we put a form together, and then we talk about it as a group prior to the first session of play, normally before we go live, and ask if there's any concerns from the boundaries and limitations that we have seen. The list is made public and available to everyone, and with identities that people want to keep confidential, remain that way. And then we proceed to play. So based on my lifestyle and my production schedule, I typically can't meet in person as a group, and I can't always meet one-on-one, but I try to capture the spirit of a Session 0 and elements of a Session 0 to level set expectations, set limits and boundaries, and adapt the fiction of our game to the needs of the players so we don't drift into any dangerous territories.
I guess I'll jump in. So I actually have two. There's the ongoing campaign, AKA Sirens. So we set it up with, I talked to each one of them individually. This is what I would like out of the show. This is a story I would like to start to tell with you. This is the tone I would like. And then from there, I find out what they want. And then what I've been doing this season, which seems to be working, is asking them multiple times, like every 2 or 3 episodes, what are your boundaries? Because I mean, we're a bunch of girls, and I don't mean that in any way, but I know what my girlfriends are like, and we together are very emotional. Like one day we're like, this is my boundary for today, and the next day it's like, oh, these 12 things are my boundaries, and then the next week, I don't have any boundaries, just go. So that kind of check-in seems to be working really well. Learning and shifting and changing some things to adapt to the group seems to be also working really well. They want to tell a certain story, or they want to get more silly or serious, and I do or don't, and we have that conversation. For conventions, playing with people that you don't know, you know you're going to be there for about 2 to 4 or 6 hours. I've been doing this thing where they usually sign up because they've seen Sirens, they know how I am, but I don't really know what they're like. So I spend 10 minutes with these questions of, you've all been adventuring together, and for about 3 years, you know each other, you're friends. There's another party member. Tell me about this party member and how they relate to you. On your first adventure, you guys went out on the road or in the mountains or whatever, but then you got attacked by a monster, and it's a mutated monster, and they start telling me what the monster looks like. And then they're chased, they lose one item, and that's when I learn, well, the monster, I learn about what they want. And then with their loss, some of them, if they lose something really big, I give them inspiration. And sometimes that'll feed everyone and they get excited. And some people don't want to lose anything big. They're like, I lose my water skin. And there's no judgment. No, I just let them get rid of an item. But I learn from them who's willing to make big decisions, who's willing to, who is just going to kind of pull back. Then one person sacrifices themselves for the group. And there I learn basically who the leader is. And that's where everybody kind of focuses their attention on them and knows where to follow them. Otherwise, it's really hard because you have all these people and they don't really have any direction. And then I have them say how they got away. Did they defeat the monster? Did they run away from the monster? And what do they tell the others when they return to the others? And it's about 10 minutes. So I've narrowed it down to 10 minutes. It was a little like 20 minutes before. But I learned so much from them, and it's almost, they don't know, but they're giving me a session 0. And then I take them on an adventure, and I know what the tone of the story is because I know what they want. And that, it's a reverse session 0, but I think I've learned more about dungeon mastering from those 10 minutes than the 30 years I've been playing.
Yeah. And to juxtapose a little bit the way that maybe Satine and I start our session 0s, specifically I think at conventions, and then I'll share a little on the streaming thing, but with the way that Satine does it, like I've watched her do this, and the way she can galvanize a table around that is impressive. The way that I approach it, coming from an Adventures League background, which is where I cut my teeth, the groups often, some of them might know each other because it's a convention, they've played together before, especially if it's like a smaller town convention. Even in LA, we have like 1 1/4 or something like that, so they kind of know each other. But sometimes characters are different, and we talk about bleed. Bleed can work both ways, and sometimes it's like a total just drenching the table in a certain way once you've played with these people over and over and over again. But with new characters, we need to establish like what the people want out of those individual characters, because just like role play, you're going in and you're doing something specific. Maybe you're trying a different pair of shoes on that week or for that session. And so it's important for us to understand what those things are going to be. And also in a way of figuring out what people's triggers might be, even if they are not necessarily comfortable discussing them right away. I like to run more noir style or more consequence appropriate kind of games. And so in that, I try and tie them together by finding out like what was their character's greatest sin. And in that, I can kind of fish for a lot of the pieces that Satine's doing, but I piecemeal it together by inquiring more about the sins and what they gained, what they lost, why they decided. Like, it has to be a selfish thing. You have to have kind of known that what you were going to do was going to create, or that you were gaining something specifically that you kind of didn't care if anybody else got hurt from it. And in that, we can learn a lot from why, how a character is approaching this thing, what kind of a past that they're coming with, and it gives me a way to interweave their sins in almost a domino effect. So if somebody over here did something, maybe that affected this person because their sin is X, and we can almost set up a chronological domino kind of falling down to set that up. In streaming, we are very safe about what type of story we're going to be telling, and then when we do those little session zero things, we kind of reiterate how close we might have gotten to any boundaries. Please, if I get close to something, give me a yellow or
I
anything.
did.
You
Yeah,
did.
the last session. It was
exactly.
really cool.
So I'm going to tell them about that.
Yeah,
But if I get to a point where I'm sharing something that you don't want me to share, please let me know.
Okay.
Okay. So my game for Inkwell Society is noir. It's pretty dark. There was an episode 12, I think, where part of the storyline, without doing too many spoiler thingies, involves children seemingly as the cause of these murders. And in each one of these big murders, there is a child who is essentially in a trance or charmed or what have you. And in one episode, Satine's character, Rose, kind of uses one as a meat shield.
It was situational.
Yeah. And, it was a level 0 game, so they had like 4 hit points. They were like, it's, okay, what am I going to do? How's this? And I encourage them to sin, during the game. Like, it's okay if you make selfish decisions, as long as you're not, like, putting the harmony of the group necessarily in danger. Like, everybody at the table knows that that's a thing, so they know that when somebody does something.
That was really hard.
Yeah.
Like, when it happened, I, didn't realize, and then I started feeling really awful. I have a niece that I'm just heart in love with, and, that popped up in my head, and I was like, it's a story, it's a story, it's a story. But because of that reaction, now the entire next season is how do I redeem myself from that? And then
during this last session, one of the other characters, so her character wasn't even in this scene, but one of the other characters had to go to the morgue and kind of perform an autopsy. I'm clearly not going to go all X-Files on this autopsy, but the conditions of that morgue were not very good. So instead of everything being cataloged and put into their appropriate boxes, there were piles.
it wasn't good. Can we leave it there?
Yeah, and as we finished that session and we went through the thing, Satine, we have our little round table at the end, and she was very good to let me know, she's like, so we didn't quite get to a yellow, but we were pretty close. If it had gone on for probably another minute longer, or if we had gotten any more graphic in that thing, it probably would have been.
It was right hanging by the claws off the edge. We're talking about X cards, so we use an X card system. Yellow is, I don't want to shut the system down, but I'm really uncomfortable. Maybe you can shift. Red is
guide.
full stop.
Yeah, and with a red, that would almost be, if the players are allowed to slip me notes, normal, or they can raise their hand. There's any way that they feel comfortable with communicating to me that they need to pause. And I know that X cards and the veil and all that stuff can be a tentative thing that needs to also be negotiated in advance during your session 0. But what she was like, oh, I probably would have slid you a note.
Yeah, one more minute, I would have been tap out.
Yeah. And that would have been, I could have checked that note and then been like, okay, so we're going to go ahead and go to break early, whatever. Or I could have just completely shifted it away. But I was also watching her the whole time and keeping an eye on her, even though the other character was over here. So I was being as cautious as I could to check in, give her eye contact, give the other players eye contact, so that I knew where they were getting, where the story, how much further.
And what
it
it's
could
sounding
go.
like is it's that setup of trust. Like,
Yeah.
It's one thing for us to set up things, to be able to talk to our players and to set up the boundaries, but our players need to have confidence that we're going to follow through. If you say, like, you can come to me with any problem, but like, a player comes to you and you're defensive, that doesn't leave the door open to it. So we have to walk what we talk, right? And so that's what it's showing, that you're willing, not only are you willing to say, like, okay, here's the yellow card, here's the X card, here's how you use it, and then your players trust you that you are going to use that in a good and healthy way.
And they've signed up for that kind of a game.
Yeah. Really quickly, for session 0 stuff, anything that Adam or Dr. B, you guys want to add?
So we do everything that we've been talking about so far with X cards and blacklists and whitelists and things like that. We also do a lot of collaborative world building with our players. So I mentioned earlier that kids especially are almost always trying to do their best to get their needs met. Oftentimes what kids really need and a lot of players really need is attention and power. And so in collaboratively world building, you're actually giving them a lot of investment in the plot and a lot of investment in owning the story. So if we say something like, we're going into a town, and everybody in this town is about to celebrate a holiday. What's the name of the holiday? And someone's like, it's Flipping Day. Awesome, Flipping Day is the holiday. You can see the banners as you're walking inside written in common. It's Flipping Day. What is something that happens on Flipping Day? And then somebody else is like, oh yeah, everybody, this is based on an old tradition of bottle flipping, because bottle flipping was a thing for a while. And so now they go into this town and everybody's bottle flipping on Flipping Day. And that has nothing to do with the plot. You're doing whatever you're going to do already. The game master has already made the plan. But now it's Flipping Day in this town, and they get to see their ideas made manifest in the game. So there's less desire to run around and burn down libraries, which is also a thing that happens.
I might be jumping ahead a little bit in terms of things, but I actually I think of a D&D game a lot like I think of a therapy session. And what I mean by that is that when you're training in psychology, one of the things we talk about a lot is power differential. And despite the fact that I literally work for my clients, the power differential is in my favor as a therapist. I write the notes. I have a lot of authority. I'm the expert in the room on how people change. And so if there's a problem, it's hard for them in the one down position to come to me with the problem. It's a lot better if I'm the one who initiates a communication about checking in. And a lot of what you're hearing from everybody up here, I think reflects that recognizing that as a DM, you have a lot of authority and power, and it's very much your responsibility to equalize that power differential as much as possible, whether it's collaborative problem solving or collaborative world building, or being overt about checking in with your players and giving them the space that they need to express themselves. It really is the DM's responsibility.
All right. We're going to jump to questions here in just a moment, but before we do that, I want to ask you guys, have you ever had an experience of needing to ask a player to leave a group? And how did that conversation go, and what would be things that you would recommend as lessons learned from your own experience with doing that?
I'll just jump in. There was one player I can think of right now was not a good fit for the group, and that's how we framed it. It's that player's needs were not going to get met by the makeup of this group. Every other member of this group wanted a very different game than this person wanted, and they were inflexible about it. And I'm not going to judge their motivations. They wanted to be a murder hobo. It's as simple as that. We had, just to give you the scenario, they were in a town that regulated the use of destructive magic, and they wanted to set merchants' carts ablaze using fireballs left and right. And they got angry when the cops came. I tried to warn them ahead of time. I try not to tell my players consequences, but I'm like, they don't like destructive magic, and the cops are pretty efficient, hint, hint. But they didn't care, and they got angry that there were some consequences, and we had to talk about it later. And thankfully, we were able to find another group for this person, but that's really the way I framed it. It was nothing personal against them. Their needs, their wants just didn't match up with everybody else. And they weren't willing to be flexible about it, so we had to find someplace else. Simple as that, nothing personal.
Oh man, I take it so personal. I feel like I'm breaking up with somebody and it hurts my heart. It breaks and aches my heart because I've invested so much love and care into each person. And when there's somebody at the table that doesn't fit, whether they just don't get along with the rest of the table or they're constantly in conflict with me and my style, it just is hard. And I can admit I've let things go too long and I don't address it when I need to. But those are things that I'm learning about. And when I like to, I have these emotional feelings, and I know when something is right or wrong, but I do take the time to try to figure it out before I make that step of, I'm sorry, this isn't a good fit. So when I do approach them, I'm like, I have my part of the conversation, I hear their side of the conversation, we see if we can come together to work it out, and if we can't, then it's a lot more thought, so it is drug out a little bit, but I want to be very clear because I've invested and they've invested. That's their free time. They've decided that they're going to share that time, and of course they have needs. And then when it's time to essentially break up, we do it with an understanding that we all know why, and that is so important. Is there isn't someone going, but why did I get kicked out? What's wrong with me personally that I got kicked out? And that's what I really don't want other people to feel, is that it's their fault. When really it's just, man, we're so lucky that there's so many different kinds of games to play, and I really hope that that person can find a game that can satisfy them, because that would make me happier, and I know that would make them happier.
Right, we kind of come from a world where this boom has only happened over kind of the last 5 years, where everybody can find a game. I know we probably all have been in the position where, like, man, I just don't know who to, like, I can't find anybody to play with. Thank God we have the internet now, but, like, when you have that's the only group of people you know, it can feel, no matter what, it's going to feel like a breakup. And no matter what, every single person at that table has some share of the responsibility for why the game isn't going to go that way. Now, obviously, majority has to have that has to take precedent, but when we're doing that, it's important to not absolve, but to everybody to kind of like apologize to each other for what we've accomplished or not accomplished, and take responsibility for it, and then forgive each other for that, and know that this doesn't mean that, like, the five of us can't play some other time. It might simply just be a different game. It might be one of us is dungeon mastering, and it might be that, oh, this game that we're going to play with that style more fits with that group works, how they work better together. And so, when we have to let people go, it's got to be a thing where there is understanding, there is responsibility taken on all sides, and that's how we kind of mitigate that feeling of being broken up with, which can lead to depression, anxiety.
I get really depressed, I'm not going to lie.
Well, and I want to be clear on something. The very brief answer I gave about this whole situation was the very abridged version. It happened over the course of several weeks and many, many conversations. Yeah. It wasn't just like, oh, you set a card on fire, peace.
And the 18th card.
I'd like to talk a little bit kind of about some of those initial conversations, because I deal a lot with conflict resolution professionally as an entrepreneur. And normally when something happens at the table and someone did something, I talk with them privately. I tell them exactly what they did factually, no editorializing, just this is what you did. And then I tell them how it made me feel. And then I don't say anything at all. And I listen. And usually in that listening, I find out that one of three things happened. There was a skill problem. They didn't know how to do something that they needed to do. It was a resource problem. They didn't have the resources to accomplish what they needed, or it was an attitude problem. There was something about the situation that they didn't like, and they felt a certain way, and they acted out. If it's a skill problem, you can teach them a skill. If it's a resource problem, you can get them resources most of the time. But if it's an attitude problem, I typically talk about how there's going to be natural consequences based on their actions that they undertook, based on their attitude. Then there's probably going to be some imposed consequences. The natural consequence of throwing dice at players, screaming at people's significant others, storming away from the table, and throwing a very heavy object at one of our car windows. This all happened, and
Oh my God.
it seems silly. Look, some people, they have some big feels about their role-playing games. I'm one of them, but it's funny. Oh, Grant's just saying everything he did. No, but I let them know, if they're going to engage in these behaviors, they can't come back to the table. And aside to that, so there's natural consequences. They do these things, windows break, they have to be paid for. Then there's imposed. We're going to have to talk about how we control and manage the table. I'd like to say manage, not control, how we facilitate the table. And there was a time where we all fired ourselves from the game. We all broke up with the game we were playing because something went down in the game, and we realized we were just playing the wrong system. The story we were trying to tell wasn't supported innately by the system that we were trying to bend and mold and shift, and they had this narrative goal that they wanted. And we're like, what if we play the same game next week? And it was a stream game, which made it tough. It's like, but what if we use this system that will empower us as players to adjudicate these situations and these narratives that most of the players want to engage with? And so we simply rebooted the show with a different system, and it was great. But we realized when the session had ended before we switched systems, we all felt horrible, and it took us all talking about, like, this game's not for us, but it's for that specific group and that specific story and that specific situation. Other players, we probably could have stayed in the same system. We could have found a different story to explore. But what we did is we personalized the solution to each individual in the group.
That's great. All right, we only have a few minutes, but I want to make sure that, Adam, do you have something? Sorry.
Like I said earlier, I run groups, and the parents are oftentimes the person who actually chooses whether the kid comes to the group or not. So there's a little bit of navigating that space that we have to do also. And we have had kids who show up to their first session and then it's not a good fit. And it's a very easy conversation with the parent, who oftentimes in our demographic is well aware that their kid has trouble fitting in. But I really do my absolute best to make sure that every kid has a place at the table, because I want the gaming table to be inclusive. So we do a lot of accommodating for players at the table. And when I very rarely have problems with players directly at me, because I'm a therapeutic game master who works with kids with social skills challenges, so I have a thick skin. And I've gotten really good at asking questions and being open and being a good listener. But when there's problems with players at the table and they are lacking that skillfulness to be able to address it, sometimes what happens when there's a problem player is the whole table is about to fall apart. So that's a big challenge, and that's where the game master has to be the facilitator to improve the skillfulness of the players. And so I've done things like taught very explicitly. I had a player who was struggling with some ADHD-related blurt-outs and really wanted to comment on everything, and it was making the other players not want to come back anymore. So there's sort of a need to make sure that the whole table doesn't fall apart, because then no kid's getting services anymore. So there's a very important thing. Sometimes you do have to have that problem player change their behavior, even though that is hard to do. But I can teach the other players how to be skillful at addressing what they need in a productive way. So I will very clearly use that as an opportunity to teach nonviolent communication sentence frames. I'm a big fan of sentence frames for empowering people to communicate. So we did things like teaching the dear man skill from dialectical behavioral therapy, where it's literally describe the situation in a non-judgmental and non-assessive way. Express an emotion. So there's an opportunity to teach emotional literacy there too. Ask clearly, because a lot of kids go, that sucks. Or I don't like it when you do that. but there's not a request of will you stop doing that, or will you wait until I'm finished speaking. So then I can teach them how to ask for what you want very explicitly, and then in the Dearman skill, it's reinforced because it's a behavioral thing. I oftentimes say like.
We always just went to Dr. B for behaviorism.
I'm not a behaviorist, but sometimes you got to say like, it would mean a lot to me if even a reinforcement that's like, man, this game would be a lot more fun for me if you would let me talk more. So I can really teach those skills very explicitly in that context once they've sort of emerged as having a need, and that's been really valuable. So problem players actually have a huge opportunity to help us as the non-problem players become more skillful also.
All right, we've only got a couple of minutes for questions, so I'm going to bring a mic down. So we have about 10 minutes left. So for questions, it's not story time. So you have a panel of experts here on running different games, running different players. And so if you can frame it with just stating the problem and then the inflection of what the question is. So why don't we come down, and Grant's got the microphone for us.
Riddle me this. All right. Are we going to do running Grant with the mic? I can do that.
If you want, or people could come to you, I mean.
Anyway.
Okay.
Please come to me. Line
Oh yeah, line in the center.
Yeah, lines in the
How about
center.
that?
Yay, cooperative
Yay.
questioning.
Yay!
So I'm John, and the question I had was, hi, was in the process of, if it comes down to booting a player from the table, how do you minimize, besides the communications, how do you minimize the feeling that players often get of, oh, well, this entire group hates me and that's why I'm gone?
Clear communication, clear reasoning, clear discussion, just honesty.
Everybody taking responsibility.
Sometimes they might actually hate the person,
Could
so
be.
why would you irrationally minimize that?
Right, it's in explaining that, also that part specifically in ways that aren't like just, well, nobody likes you, goodbye.
Well, sometimes me in a group too. I don't really hate anyone. It's a role-playing game, and it's fun, and it's intense, and we go through all these emotions. Sometimes I let them know some of their positive qualities that I like about them as a person, and what we can do to maybe establish goals in the future to find a game that's a good fit for them in the future, and understand sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, we have to be very attentive to the idea that we are here to promote safety for everybody at the table, and if somebody is a problem player that is giving everybody problems, then it's, unless you're one of those people down there, it's not your job, and you're not equipped for it. And you can go and study on your own and do stuff like that, but at a certain point, sometimes the best thing you can do is to actually help that person find somebody who can help them work through the issues if that they have.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Also, amazing job of jumping right into the question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we call that reinforcement.
Hi guys, I'm Brian. What do you guys view the GM's role, if any, is when there are specific members of your game party that have problems with each other, i.e. John doesn't like Bill?
I said earlier, teach John how to talk to Bill better. Really let that be something that they can do. Your job as the facilitator, as the game master, but your job is not to make everybody be friends. Your job is to have John do his best to get Bill to stop doing what he's doing or to do something else. I'm a huge fan of nonviolent communication. There's a good audio book read by Marshall Rosenberg that's super boring, and you have to set it at a faster speed because he talks really slow. But it's really, really valuable because it tells you exactly, and it really is very empowering. So I'd use something like that.
What's it called?
Yeah, come on, man.
Title of the book, yeah.
It's called Nonviolent Communication. I think there's only one Audible book, but I can look it up.
Thank you.
But I see it as an opportunity, especially given some of the groups that like Adam and I run, to teach the difference between having to like the person and being able to work with them and play with them. Because there's plenty of people that I just personally play with in one of my groups that I'm a player in that we don't hang out, and I probably wouldn't hang out with them, but we run it's a great thing to play with them.
I'm right here, Raphael. I've worked about 6 pro wrestling matches in my life, and I'm proud of them. And I did not like everyone I had to wrestle. But with that said, to call back something Rudy mentioned earlier, I trusted them though, and we trusted each other. So we learned that even if we don't like each other, we can absolutely trust each other and have each other's back.
Yeah, I think the term "I don't like a thing" is a simplification, and understanding what that actually means will clarify a lot, and you can understand a lot about the people.
Yeah, we had two characters on a live stream where one character was saying that, but it mostly came down to the fact the other one was just talking too much, trampling any moment that the other one got to talk, and that was mitigated when we brought that to light and let everybody know, and those two people still game together.
Thanks, guys.
I found the book. It's called Nonviolent Communication.
You rock!
There's actually some smaller words underneath that I can't read.
That was so anticlimactic.
Raphael, can you read those words in yellow on the
I
white
like the
background?
simplification of it.
Create your life, your relationships, and your world in harmony with your values.
And it's got a peace sign like that on the
That's
cover.
so cool. Thank you.
Dr. Brian Quinones, my question is, I run autism groups. Specifically, my clients tend to be a little bit more violent in general, like just in general. So with the conflict resolution that I'm seeing is like, and I wanted to see if you guys are seeing this as well, is client starts creating like a conflict situation, doesn't realize that in his moment of being aggressive, he's putting himself in danger by the other players in the room, because their level of violence is actually much higher than his, for example. So are you guys seeing like the conflict, even in the resolution of the conflict in the immediacy, like the spillover over several weeks? Like, so like, I don't know if I'm saying
So basically, like, if you're seeing players doing things that could escalate onto not necessarily something in the game, but outside of the game that could be causing a problem.
Yeah.
So interpersonal relations and trying to deal with that. So, I think some of the stuff like what Adam was talking about with like the non-violent.
I was going to plug, we actually have a panel later today about autism, and then there's a panel later today about therapeutic game mastering. So you should come to that panel, and maybe maybe your question might be answered there.
Okay. All right.
Just to save time.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dee. My question is kind of after the conflict resolution process happens between two players, and you find that in the end, one person is, hey, you did this, it hurt me, can we fix it? And the other is, it's just a game, I don't know why you care about this, let's just ignore it.
That doesn't sound resolved.
Yeah.
That sounds so dismissive.
When it gets to that point and you kind of can't go forward anymore.
Oh, boy.
And that's the times where, I'll jump in, talking about the session zero, and talking about, like, if we can't get along, what does that look like? And, like what I think Satine and Rudy were talking about as well, is having those clear expectations of what is okay and what isn't okay. And if we can't come to an agreement, then, it might be somebody needs to walk.
I think there's, once again, a really powerful utility of sentence frames. So oftentimes people don't know their request is being made from them.
Right.
And so I gift to you the way that it was gifted from me from the heavens. The sentence frame, would you be willing to? Would you be willing to?
Oh, God, yes.
Wow.
It's not will you, there's no demand there, it's a request. Would you be willing to do this differently, or would you be willing to do that? And the person has a choice. It's not a demand, there's no threat. Like, do this or else. It is, hey, I'm noticing that when I'm talking, oftentimes I'm not done before you start talking. Would you be willing to work on waiting until I'm done talking before you start talking? I'm having a need to be listened to. It's a really, like, you can't have a problem with that request, really. I'm not accusing you, like, that thing you're doing is annoying. Like, that's true, but it's accusatory. And so really, like, using the sentence frames really intentionally can minimize the amount of defensiveness that happens or dismissiveness that happens, because there has to be an answer. Would you be willing to do that? I don't know why you care so much. Is that a no? And it's a tough conversation, but I think it's really valuable.
And then beyond that, it also opens the door for some. You might have found you might be illuminated to the trigger that's happening, because they'd be like, yes, I would. Would you be available to, or would you try this as well? And that way you can find out, oh, look, I was actually doing this thing that caused this, which caused that, and now the game is better.
At the core of it is compassion.
Yep.
And trust.
Consideration.
Yeah, trust.
Thank you.
think we have time for one last, and then we got to wrap up, unfortunately.
Okay, so my question revolves because online tabletop games, because you don't have that personal connection of being there in the same room. I was wondering if you had any specific advice to get people talking if they have a problem in that situation, because you can't exactly see their reactions or if anything's making them uncomfortable because you're kind of staring at a screen and not a person's face.
There's still other clues there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got video, you are seeing their face. If you've got voice,
Chat.
yeah, you can hear that, and sometimes you can even hear sort of a terseness, or you can even notice if people aren't talking when they once were in chat. I mean, there still are clues that you can key into, and especially if there's any sort of behavior change. Anything out of the ordinary for that person, then that's a clue to check in with them.
Yeah, I think Grant runs the more live stream.
This is Grant's question.
And I would say many of the relationships I have with my online players are as close and personal as my face-to-face game sessions. It's got to go back to that building trust, right? And also something Megan mentioned earlier in her slides was talking about curating groups and making sure you have the right group. It's very difficult if you do an LFG looking for group online. I try to make people aware of tools we can use in games to communicate. Not everyone's a read-write learner. Not everyone's a great author. Not everyone chats with amazing etiquette. However, if it's like, here's a very simple tool you can use, and I want you to know that the tool is there should you choose to use it. And also maybe messaging people, did you get out of the game what you were hoping to get out of today? And if not, what were you hoping to get out? And you know, Satine gave great examples of doing that near the beginning of the session, right? So that's a good place. But also ending, did you guys get the experience that you were hoping for through this online play?
Having played in a game that Grant ran, and especially one that I had to drop into towards the second half of that, I can tell you that we had a chat system in the background that allowed us to be able to kind of communicate and almost like raise our hand when we wanted to be able to participate in something if we wanted to hit that. And that meant that both Grant could see it, but the other players could see it too. And that can help where the eye contact may not necessarily be something that everybody is keyed into, because they're in their room, in their house, with their cat running all over the place, with their child screaming in the background, with whatever else is going on. Giving people other avenues that can make the connection helped us.
Yeah, and front loading. You know, you do a lot of work in the front of before the game starts, and then you say, does everyone understand? Okay, let's go.
Thank you. That's actually a really good idea. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. I'm sorry. I think that is our time, right? Oh, yeah, we're overtime.
But they haven't kicked us out yet.
Yeah,
they're trying to.
So, thank you guys for sticking around.
If you have questions, maybe some of us will hang around in the back.
We'll be outside.
Whoever's available out of us will hang. So.
Satine.
Game to Grow also has a table in the expo hall by Table Titans.
It went away. Okay, never mind.
I love all your elf ears and your costumes. Whee!